Dear friends and students, you are listening to the book Glimpses of World History by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. Chapter number 31. Jesus and Christianity. April 12th, 1932. The Kushan Empire in the northwest of India and the Han dynasty in China have carried us beyond an important landmark in history, and we must go back to it. So far, we have been dealing with dates BC, before Christ. Now we are in the Christian era, AD or AC. The era, as its name implies, dates from Christ, from the supposed date of birth of Christ. As a matter of fact, it is probable that Christ was born 4 years before this date, but that makes little difference. It is customary to refer to dates after Christ as AD, Anno Domini, in the year of the Lord. There is no harm in following this widespread practice, but it seems to me more scientific to use the letters AC, after Christ, for these dates, just as we have been using BC. I propose to do so. The story of Christ, or Jesus, as his name was, is given in the New Testament of the Bible, and you know something about it. In these accounts, given in the Gospels, little is said about his youth. He was born at Nazareth, he preached in Galilee, and he came to Jerusalem when he was over 30. Soon after, he was tried and sentenced by the Roman governor Pontius Pilate. It is not clear what Jesus did or where he went before he started his preaching. All over Central Asia, in Kashmir and Ladakh and Tibet, and even farther north, there is still a strong belief that Jesus, or Isa, traveled about there. Some people believe that he visited India also. It is not possible to say anything with certainty, and indeed, most authorities who have studied the life of Jesus do not believe that Jesus came to India or Central Asia. But there is nothing inherently improbable in his having done so. In those days, the great universities of India, especially Takshashila in the northwest, attracted earnest students from distant countries. And Jesus might well have come there in quest of knowledge. In many respects, the teaching of Jesus is so similar to Gautama's teaching that it seems highly probable that he was fully acquainted with it. But Buddhism was sufficiently known in other countries, and Jesus could well have known of it without coming to India. Religions, as every schoolgirl knows, have led to conflict and bitter struggles. But it is interesting to watch the beginnings of the world religions and to compare them. There is so much that is similar in their outlook and their teaching that one wonders why people should be foolish enough to quarrel about details and unessentials. But the early teachings are added to and distorted till it is difficult to recognize them, and the place of the teacher is taken by narrow-minded and intolerant bigots. Often enough, religion has served as a handmaiden to politics and imperialism. It was the old Roman policy to cultivate superstition for the benefit, or rather, for the exploitation of the masses. For it was easier to keep down the people if they were superstitious. The Roman aristocrats would consent to dabble in high philosophy, but what was good for them was not good or safe for the masses. Machiavelli, a famous Italian of a later day, who has written a book on politics, states that religion is necessary for government and that it may be the duty of a ruler to support a religion which he believes to be false. Even in recent times, we have had innumerable instances of imperialism advancing under the cloak of religion. It is not surprising that Karl Marx wrote that religion is the opium of the masses. Jesus was a Jew, and the Jews were and are a peculiar and strangely persevering people. After a brief period of glory in the days of David and Solomon, they fell on evil days. Even this glory was on a small scale, but it was magnified in their imaginations till it became a kind of golden age of the past, which would come again at the appointed time, when the Jews would become great and powerful. They spread out all over the Roman Empire and elsewhere, but held together, firm in the belief that their day of glory was coming and that a Messiah would usher this in. It is one of the wonders of history how the Jews, without a home or a refuge, harassed and persecuted beyond measure, and often done to death, have preserved their identity and held together for over 2,000 years. The Jews expected a Messiah, and perhaps they had hopes of Jesus, but they were soon disappointed. Jesus talked a strange language of revolt against existing conditions and the social order. In particular, he was against the rich and the hypocrites who made of religion a matter of certain observances and ceremonial. Instead of promising wealth and glory, he asked people to give up even what they had for a vague and mythical kingdom of heaven. He talked in stories and parables, but it is clear that he was a born rebel who could not tolerate existing conditions and was out to change them. This was not what the Jews wanted, and so most of them turned against him and handed him over to the Roman authorities. The Roman people were not intolerant so far as religions went, for the empire tolerated all religions, and even if someone chose to blaspheme or curse any of the gods, he was not punished. As one of the emperors, Tiberius, said, "If the gods are insulted, let them see to it themselves." The Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, before whom Jesus was produced, could not therefore have worried about the religious aspect of the matter. Jesus was looked upon as political, and by the Jews as a social rebel. And as such, he was tried and sentenced and crucified at Golgotha. In the hour of his agony, even his chosen disciples deserted him and denied him, and by their betrayal made his suffering almost unbearable, so that, before he died, he uttered those strangely moving words, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" Jesus was quite young, being only a little over 30 when he died. We read in the beautiful language of the Gospels the tragic story of his death and are moved. The growth of Christianity in after ages has made millions revere the name of Jesus, although they have seldom followed his teachings. But we must remember that when he was crucified, he was not widely known outside Palestine. The people in Rome knew nothing about him, and even Pontius Pilate must have attached little importance to the incident. The immediate followers and disciples of Jesus were frightened into denying him. But soon after his death, a newcomer, Paul, who had not seen Jesus himself, started spreading what he considered to be the Christian doctrine. Many people think that the Christianity that Paul preached was very different from the teachings of Jesus. Paul was an able and learned person, but he was not a social rebel such as Jesus was. Paul succeeded, however, and Christianity gradually spread. The Romans attached little importance to it to begin with. They thought Christians were a sect of the Jews. But the Christians became aggressive. They were hostile to all other religions, and they refused absolutely to worship the emperor's image. The Romans could not understand this mentality, and, as it appeared to them, narrow-mindedness. They considered the Christians, therefore, as cranks who were pugnacious and uncultured, and opposed to human progress. As a religion, they might have tolerated Christianity, but the Christian refusal to pay homage to the emperor's image was looked upon as political treason and was made punishable with death. The Christians also strongly criticized the gladiatorial shows. Then followed the persecution of the Christians, and their property was confiscated and they were thrown to the lions. You must have read stories of these Christian martyrs, and perhaps you have also seen cinema films of them. But when a person is prepared to die for a cause, and indeed to glory in such a death, it is impossible to suppress him or the cause he represents. And the Roman Empire wholly failed to suppress the Christians. Indeed, it was Christianity that came out triumphant in the conflict. And early in the 4th century after Christ, one of the Roman emperors himself became a Christian, and Christianity became the official religion of the empire. This was Constantine, who founded Constantinople. We shall come to him later. As Christianity grew, violent disputes arose about the divinity of Jesus. You will remember my telling you how Gautama, the Buddha, who claimed no divinity, came to be worshipped as a god and as an avatar. Similarly, Jesus claimed no divinity. His repeated statements that he was the Son of God and the Son of Man do not necessarily mean any divine or superhuman claim. But human beings like to make gods of their great men, whom, having deified, they refrain from following. 600 years later, the Prophet Muhammad started another great religion. But, profiting perhaps by these instances, he stated clearly and repeatedly that he was human and not divine. So, instead of understanding and following the teachings of Jesus, the Christians argued and quarreled about the nature of Jesus' divinity and about the Trinity. They called each other heretics and persecuted each other and cut each other's heads off. There was a great and violent controversy at one time among different Christian sects over a certain diphthong. One party said that the word homoousion should be used in a prayer. The other wanted homoiousion. This difference had reference to the divinity of Jesus. Over this diphthong, fierce war was waged and large numbers of people were slaughtered. These internal disputes took place as the church grew in power. They have continued between various Christian sects till quite recent times in the West. You may be surprised to learn that Christianity came to India long before it went to England or Western Europe, and when even in Rome it was a despised and proscribed sect. Within 100 years or so of the death of Jesus, Christian missionaries came to South India by sea. They were received courteously and permitted to preach their new faith. They converted a large number of people, and their descendants have lived there with varying fortunes to this day. Most of them belong to old Christian sects which have ceased to exist in Europe. Some of these have their headquarters now in Asia Minor. Christianity is politically the dominant religion today because it is the religion of the dominant peoples of Europe. But it is strange to think of the rebel Jesus preaching non-violence and ahimsa and a revolt against the social order, and then to compare him with his loud-voiced followers of today, with their imperialism and armaments and wars and worship of wealth. The Sermon on the Mount and modern European and American Christianity, how amazingly dissimilar they are. It is not surprising that many people should think that Bapu is far nearer to Christ's teaching than most of his so-called followers in the West today. Dear friends and students, till now you were listening to the book The Glimpses of World History by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe to the channel. Let's meet in the next episode. Dear friends and students, you are listening to the book Glimpses of World History by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. Chapter number 32. The Roman Empire. April 23rd, 1932. I have not written to you for many days, my dear. I have been disturbed and thrilled by news from Allahabad, and, above all, by news of Dol Amma, your old grandmother. And I have chafed a little at my comparative comfort in jail when my mother, frail and weak, has had to face and receive the lathi blows of the police. But I must not allow my thoughts to run away with me and to interfere with my story. We shall go back to Rome, or Romaka as the old Sanskrit books have it. You will remember that we have talked of the end of the Roman Republic and of the coming of the Roman Empire. Octavian, the adopted son of Julius Caesar, became the first monarch under the name of Augustus Caesar. He did not call himself king, partly because the title was not considered big enough for him, and partly because he wanted to keep up the outward forms of the republic. He therefore called himself imperator, or commander. This word imperator thus came to be the highest title, and, as you perhaps know, the English word emperor comes from it. So the early empire in Rome gave two words which were long coveted and used by monarchs all over the world almost: emperor and Caesar, or Kaiser, or Tsar. Originally, it was supposed that there could only be one emperor at one time, a kind of boss of the whole world. Rome was called Mistress of the World, and people in the West thought that the whole world was overshadowed by Rome. This was, of course, incorrect, and only displayed ignorance of geography and history. The Roman Empire was largely a Mediterranean empire and never went beyond Mesopotamia in the east. There were bigger and more powerful and more cultured states in China and India from time to time. Nonetheless, so far as the Western world was concerned, Rome was the sole empire, and as such, represented a kind of world empire to the ancients. It had tremendous prestige. The most wonderful thing about Rome is this idea behind it: the idea of world dominion, of the headship of the world. Even when Rome fell, this idea protected it and gave it strength. And the idea persisted even when it was cut off completely from Rome itself. So much so that the empire itself vanished and became a phantom, but the idea remained. I find it a little difficult to write of Rome and of its successors. It is not easy to pick and choose what to tell you. And my mind is, I'm afraid, a bit of a jumble of ill-assorted pictures gathered from old books that I have read, largely in prison. Indeed, one of the famous books on Roman history I would probably not have read if I had not come to prison. The book is so big that it is difficult to find time, in the midst of other activities, to read it right through. It is called The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, and is by an Englishman named Gibbon. It was written quite a long time ago, about 150 years, on the shores of Lac Léman in Switzerland. But it makes fascinating reading even now. And I found its story, given in somewhat pompous but melodious language, more engrossing than any novel. Nearly 10 years ago, I read it in Lucknow District Jail, and for over a month I lived with Gibbon for a close companion, wrapped up in the images of the past that his language evoked. I was suddenly discharged before I had quite finished the book. The charm was broken, and I found some difficulty in finding the time and the mood to go back to ancient Rome and Constantinople and read the 100 or so pages that remained. But this was nearly 10 years ago, and of course, I have forgotten a very great deal of what I read then. Still, enough remains in my mind to fill it and confuse it, and I do not want the confusion to pass on to you. Let us first of all cast a look at the Roman Empire, or empires through the ages. Later, perhaps, one may try to fill in the picture a little. The empire begins with Augustus Caesar on the eve of the Christian era. For a little while, the emperors paid deference to the Senate, but almost the last traces of the Republic disappear soon enough, and the emperor becomes all-powerful, a wholly autocratic monarch, indeed, almost a god. During his lifetime, he is worshipped as semi-divine. After his death, he becomes a full god. All the writers of the day endow most of the early emperors with every virtue, especially Augustus. They call it the Golden Age, the Age of Augustus, when every virtue flourished and the good were rewarded and the wicked punished. That is the way writers have in despotic countries, where it is obvious that the praise of the ruler pays. Some of the most famous of Latin authors, Virgil, Ovid, Horace, whose books we had to read at school, lived about this time. It is possible that after the civil wars and troubles which took place continually during the latter days of the Republic, it was a great relief to have a period of peace and respite, when trade and some measure of civilization could flourish. But what was this civilization? It was a rich man's civilization. And these rich were not even like the artistic and keen-witted rich of ancient Greece, but a rather commonplace and dull crowd, whose chief job was to enjoy themselves. From all over the world, foods and articles of luxury came for them, and there was great magnificence and show. The tribe of such people is not extinct even yet. There was pomp and show and a succession of gorgeous processions and games in the circus and gladiators done to death. But behind this pomp was the misery of the masses. There was heavy taxation which fell on the common people chiefly, and the burden of work fell on the innumerable slaves. Even their doctoring and philosophizing and thinking the great ones of Rome left largely to Greek slaves. There was exceedingly little attempt to educate or to find out facts about the world, of which they called themselves the masters. Emperor followed emperor, and some were bad and some were very bad. And gradually, the army became all-powerful and could make and unmake emperors. So it came about that there was bidding to gain the favor of the army, and money was squeezed from the masses or from conquered territories to bribe the army. One of the great sources of revenue was the slave trade, and there were regular organized slave hunts by Roman armies in the east. Slave merchants accompanied the armies to buy up the slaves on the spot. The island of Delos, sacred to the old Greeks, became a great slave market, where sometimes as many as 10,000 slaves were sold in a day. In the great Colosseum of Rome, a popular emperor used to display as many as 1,200 gladiators at a time, slaves who were to die to provide sport for the emperor and his people. Such was Roman civilization in the days of the empire. And yet our friend Gibbon writes that, if a man were called upon to fix the period in the history of the world when the human race was most happy and prosperous, he would, without hesitation, name that which elapsed from the death of Domitian to the accession of Commodus. This means the 84 years from 96 AC to 180 AC. I am afraid Gibbon, with all his learning, has said something with which most people will certainly hesitate to agree. He talks of the human race, meaning thereby the Mediterranean world chiefly, for he could have had little or no knowledge of India or China or ancient Egypt. But perhaps I am a little hard on Rome. It must have been a pleasant change to have some measure of peace within the Roman dominions. There were frequent wars on the frontiers, but within the empire there was, during the early days at least, the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. There was some security, and this brought trade. Roman citizenship was extended to the whole Roman world. But remember that the poor slaves had nothing to do with it. And also remember that the emperor was all-powerful, and the citizen had few rights. Any discussion on politics would have been considered treason against the imperator. For the upper classes, there was a measure of uniform government and one law. This must have been a great gain to many people who had previously suffered under worse despotisms. Gradually, the Romans became too lazy or otherwise unfit even to fight in their own armies. The farmers in the countryside became poorer under the burdens they had to carry, and so did the people in the city. But the emperors wanted to keep the city folk pleased, so that they might not give trouble. For this purpose, free bread was given to the people of Rome, and free games in the circus to amuse them. Thus they were kept in good humor, but this free distribution could only take place in a few places, and even this was done at the cost of misery and suffering to the slave populations in other countries like Egypt, who provided the free flour. As the Roman people did not readily join the armies, people from outside the empire, barbarians as they were called, were enlisted, and the Roman armies came largely to consist of people who were allied or related to the barbarian enemies of Rome. On the frontiers, these barbarian tribes continually pressed and hemmed in the Romans. As Rome grew weaker, the barbarians seemed to grow stronger and more daring. From the east especially, there was danger, and as this frontier was far from Rome, it was not easy to defend it. 300 years after Augustus Caesar, an emperor named Constantine took a great step which was to have far-reaching consequences. He actually shifted the seat of his empire from Rome to the east. Near an old city called Byzantium, on the shores of the Bosphorus, between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, he founded a new city, which he called, after himself, Constantinople. Constantinople, or New Rome as it was also called, became then the capital and seat of the Roman Empire. Even today, in many parts of Asia, Constantinople is known as Rum or Roum. Dear friends and students, till now you were listening to the book The Glimpses of World History by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe to the channel. Let's meet in the next episode. Dear friends and students, you are listening to the book Glimpses of World History by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. Chapter number 33. The Roman Empire splits up and finally becomes a ghost. April 24th, 1932. We shall continue today our survey of the Empire of Rome. Early in the 4th century of the Christian era, in 326 AC, Constantine founded the city of Constantinople, near the site of Old Byzantium, and he shifted the capital of his empire all the way from Old Rome to this new Rome on the Bosphorus. Have a look at the map. You will see that this new city of Constantinople stands on the edge of Europe, looking out towards mighty Asia. It is a kind of link between the two continents. Many great trade routes pass through it, both by land and sea. It is a fine position for a city and for a capital. Constantine chose well, but he or his successors had to pay for this change of capital. Just as Old Rome was a bit too far from Asia Minor and the East, so the new Eastern capital was too far from the Western countries like Gaul and Britain. To get over this difficulty, for a while, there were joint emperors, one sitting in Rome, the other in Constantinople. This led to a regular division of the empire into the Western and the Eastern. But the Western Empire, which had Rome for its capital, did not long survive the shock. It could not defend itself against those whom it called the barbarians. The Goths, a Germanic tribe, came and sacked Rome. And then came the Vandals and the Huns, and the Western Empire collapsed. You must have heard the word Hun used. During the last Great War, it was commonly applied by the English to the Germans in order to make out that the Germans were very cruel and barbarous. As a matter of fact, in wartime, everybody, or almost everybody, loses his head and forgets all that he has learnt of civilization and good manners, and behaves cruelly and barbarously. The Germans behaved in this way. So did the English and the French. There was little to choose between them in this respect. The word Hun has become a terrible term of reproach. So also has the word Vandal. Probably these Huns and Vandals were rather coarse and cruel, and did a lot of damage. But we must remember that all the accounts of them that we have got are from their enemies, the Romans, and one can hardly expect them to be impartial. Anyhow, the Goths and the Vandals and the Huns knocked down the Western Roman Empire like a house of cards. One of the reasons why they succeeded so easily was probably because the Roman peasantry was so utterly miserable under the empire, and was so heavily taxed and so much in debt that they welcomed any change. Just as the poor Indian peasant today would welcome any change in his terrible poverty and misery. The Western Roman Empire thus collapsed. Some centuries later, it was to rise again in a different form. The Eastern Empire, however, continued, although it was hard put to it to withstand the attacks of the Huns and others. Not only did it survive these attacks, but it carried on century after century in spite of continuous fighting against the Arabs and later against the Turks. For the amazing period of 1,100 years it survived, till at last it fell in 1453 AC, when Constantinople was captured by the Ottoman Turks or the Osmanlis. Ever since then, for nearly 500 years now, Constantinople, or Istanbul as they call it, has been in the possession of the Turks. From there, they repeatedly marched into Europe and came right up to the walls of Vienna. They were driven back gradually in later centuries, and a dozen years ago, after their defeat in the Great War, they nearly lost Constantinople. The English were in possession of this city, and the Turkish Sultan was a puppet in their hands. But a great leader, Mustafa Kemal Pasha, came to rescue his people, and, after a heroic struggle, he succeeded. Today, Turkey is a republic, and the Sultan has vanished forever. Kemal Pasha is the president of the republic. Constantinople, the seat of an empire for 1,500 years, first the Eastern Roman and then the Turkish, is still part of the Turkish state, but it is not even its capital. The Turks have preferred to keep away from its imperial associations and to have their capital at Angora or Ankara, far away in Asia Minor. We have hurried through nearly 2,000 years and followed rapidly the changes which came, one after another, the founding of Constantinople and the transfer of the capital of the Roman Empire to the new city. But Constantine did another novel thing. He turned Christian, and as he was the emperor, that meant, of course, that Christianity became the official religion of the empire. It must have been a strange thing, this sudden change in the position of Christianity, from that of a persecuted faith to an imperial religion. The change did not do it much good for a while. Different sects of Christians started quarreling with each other. Ultimately, there was a great break between two sections, the Latin section and the Greek. The Latin section had its headquarters in Rome, and the Bishop of Rome was looked up to as its head, later to become the Pope of Rome. And the Greek section had its headquarters in Constantinople. The Latin church spread all over northern and western Europe and came to be known as the Roman Catholic Church. The Greek church was known as the Orthodox Church. After the fall of the Eastern Roman Empire, Russia was the chief country where the Orthodox Church flourished. Now, with Bolshevism in Russia, this church, or any other church, has no official position there. I refer to the Eastern Roman Empire, and yet this had little to do with Rome. Even the language they used was Greek, not Latin. In a sense, it might almost be considered to have been a continuation of Alexander's Greek Empire. It had little contact with Western Europe, although for long it would not admit the right of Western countries to be independent of it. And yet, the Eastern Empire stuck to the word Roman, and the people were called Roman, as if there was some magic in the word. And, stranger still, the city of Rome, in spite of its fall from the headship of empire, did not lose its prestige. And even the barbarians who came to conquer it seemed to hesitate and treated it with deference. Such is the power of a great name and the power of ideas. Having lost the empire, Rome started carving out a new empire, but of a different kind. It was said that Peter, the disciple of Jesus, had come to Rome and become the first bishop there. This gave sanctity to the place in the eyes of many Christians and added special importance to the bishopric of Rome. The Bishop of Rome was, to begin with, not unlike other bishops. But he grew in importance after the emperor went to Constantinople. There was no one to overshadow him then, and, as the successor to the chair of Peter, he came to be regarded as the chief of the bishops. Later, he came to be called the Pope, and as you know, the popes exist to this day and are the heads of the Roman Catholic Church. It is curious to note that one of the reasons for the split between the Roman Church and the Greek Orthodox Church was the use of images. The Roman Church encouraged the worship of the images of its saints, and especially of Mary, the mother of Jesus, while the Orthodox Church objected to this strongly. Rome was occupied and ruled for many generations by chiefs of the northern tribes. But even they often acknowledged the overlordship of the emperor at Constantinople. Meanwhile, the power of the Bishop of Rome as a religious head grew till he felt strong enough to defy Constantinople. When trouble came over the question of image worship, the Pope decided to cut Rome off completely from the East. Much had happened meanwhile, of which we shall have to speak later. A new religion, Islam, had arisen in Arabia, and the Arabs had overrun all northern Africa and Spain, and were attacking the heart of Europe. New states were being formed in northern and western Europe, and the Eastern Roman Empire was being fiercely assailed by the Arabs. The Pope begged for assistance from a great leader of the Franks, a Germanic tribe of the north, and later, Karl or Charles, the head of the Franks, was crowned emperor in Rome. This was quite a new empire or state, but they called it the Roman Empire, and later, the Holy Roman Empire. They could not think of an empire without its being Roman, and although Charlemagne, or Charles the Great as he is called, had little to do with Rome, he became imperator and Caesar and Augustus. The new empire was supposed to be a continuation of the old one, but there was an addition to its name. It had become holy. It was holy because it was specially a Christian empire, with the Pope for its godfather. Again, you see the strange power of ideas. A Frank or a German living in Central Europe becomes Roman emperor. And the future history of this holy empire is stranger still. As an empire, it became a very shadowy affair. While the Eastern Roman Empire at Constantinople carried on as a state, this Western one changed and vanished and appeared again from time to time. It was indeed a phantom and ghostly empire, continuing to exist in theory by the prestige of the Roman name and the Christian Church. It was an empire of the imagination with little of reality. Someone, I think it was Voltaire, defined this Holy Roman Empire as something which was neither holy, nor Roman, nor an empire. Just as someone else once defined the Indian civil service, with which we are unfortunately still afflicted in this country, as neither Indian, nor civil, nor a service. Whatever it was, this phantom Holy Roman Empire carried on in name at least for 1,000 years. And it was only a little over 100 years ago, in Napoleon's time, that it finally ended. The end was not very remarkable or dramatic. Indeed, few people must have noticed it, as in reality it had not existed for a long time. But the ghost was laid at last, though not finally, for it rose up again in different guises, as Kaisers and Tsars and the like. Most of these were laid to rest during the Great War, which ended 14 years ago. Dear friends and students, till now you were listening to the book The Glimpses of World History by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe to the channel. Let's meet in the next episode. Dear friends and students, you are listening to the book Glimpses of World History by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. Chapter number 34. The Idea of the World State. April 25th, 1932. I fear I must tire you and perplex you often enough with these letters. Especially my last two letters about the Roman empires must be a trial for you. I have gone backwards and forwards through thousands of years and across thousands of miles. And if I have succeeded in creating some confusion in your mind, the fault is entirely mine. Don't be downhearted. Carry on. If you do not follow what I say at any place, do not trouble about it, but go on. These letters are not meant to teach you history, but just to give you glimpses of it, and to awaken your curiosity. You must be rather tired of the Roman empires. I confess I am. But we shall bear with them a little more today, and then take leave of them for a while. You know that there is a great deal of talk nowadays of nationalism and patriotism, the love of one's country. Nearly all of us in India today are intense nationalists. This nationalism is quite a new thing in history, and perhaps we may study its beginning and growth in the course of these letters. There was hardly any such feeling at the time of the Roman empires. The empire was supposed to be one great state ruling the world. There never has been an empire or state which has ruled the whole world. But, owing to ignorance of geography and the great difficulty of transportation and traveling across long distances, people often thought in olden times that such a state did exist. Thus, in Europe and round the Mediterranean, the Roman state, even before it became an empire, was looked up to as a kind of super-state to which all the others were subordinate. So great was its prestige that some countries, like Pergamum, the Greek state in Asia Minor, and Egypt, were actually presented to the Roman people by their rulers. They felt that Rome was all-powerful and irresistible. And yet, as I have told you, whether as a republic or as an empire, Rome never ruled over much more than the Mediterranean countries. The barbarians of the north of Europe would not submit to it, and it did not care much about them. But whatever the extent of Rome's authority might have been, it had the idea of a world state behind it. And this idea was accepted by most people of the day in the West. It was because of this that the Roman empires survived for so long, and their name and prestige were great, even when there was no substance behind them. This idea of one great state dominating over the rest of the world was not peculiar to Rome. We find it in China and India in the old days. As you know, the Chinese state was often a vaster one than the Roman Empire, extending right up to the Caspian Sea. The Chinese emperor, the Son of Heaven as he was called, was considered by the Chinese as the universal sovereign. It is true there were tribes and people who gave trouble and who did not obey the emperor. But they were the barbarians, just as the Romans called the North Europeans barbarians. In the same way in India, from the earliest days, you find references to these so-called universal sovereigns, Chakravarti Rajas. Their idea of the world was very limited, of course. India itself was so enormous that it seemed the world to them, and the overlordship of India appeared to them to be the overlordship of the world. The others outside were the barbarians, the Mlecchas. The mythical Bharat, who has given his name to our country, Bharatvarsha, is supposed by tradition to have been such a Chakravarti sovereign. Yudhishthira and his brothers fought, according to the Mahabharata, for this world sovereignty. The Ashvamedha, the great horse sacrifice, was a challenge and symbol of world dominion. Ashoka probably aimed at it before. Overcome by remorse, he stopped all fighting. Later on, you will see other imperialist sovereigns of India, like the Guptas, who also aimed at this. You will thus see that in the old days, people often thought in terms of universal sovereigns and world states. Long afterwards came nationalism and a new kind of imperialism. And between the two, they have played sufficient havoc in this world. Again, there is talk today of a world state, not a great empire or a universal sovereign, but a kind of world republic which would prevent the exploitation of one nation or people or class by another. Whether or not anything like this will take place in the near future, it is difficult to say. But the world is in a bad way, and there seems to be no other way to get rid of its illness. I have referred repeatedly to the barbarians of Northern Europe. I use the word because they are referred to as such by the Romans. These people, like the nomads and other tribes of Central Asia, were certainly less civilized than their neighbors in Rome or in India. But they were more vigorous, as they lived an open-air life. Later, they became Christians, and even when they conquered Rome, they did not come, as a rule, as ruthless enemies. The modern nations of Northern Europe are descended from these barbarian tribes, the Goths and Franks and others. I have not given you the names of the Roman emperors. There were crowds of them, and barring a few, they were bad enough. Some were monsters of evil. You have no doubt heard of Nero, but there were many far worse than he was. One woman, Irene, actually killed her own son, who was emperor, in order to become empress. This was in Constantinople. One emperor of Rome stands out above the others. His name was Marcus Aurelius Antoninus. He is supposed to have been a philosopher, and a book of his, containing his thoughts and meditations, is well worth study. To make up for Marcus Aurelius, his son, who succeeded him, was one of the worst villains that Rome produced. For the first 300 years of the Roman Empire, Rome was the center of the Western world. It must have been a great city, full of mighty buildings, and people must have come to it from all over the empire and even beyond it. Numerous ships brought dainties from distant countries, rare foods and costly stuffs. Every year, it is said, a fleet of 120 ships went from an Egyptian port in the Red Sea to India. They went just in time to take advantage of the monsoon winds, and this helped them greatly. Usually, they went to South India. They loaded their precious goods and returned, with the help again of the prevailing winds, to Egypt. From Egypt, the goods were sent overland and by sea to Rome. But all this trade was largely for the benefit of the rich. Behind the luxury of the few was the misery of the many. For over 300 years, Rome was supreme in the West, and afterwards, when Constantinople was founded, it shared supremacy with it. It is curious that during this long period, it did not produce anything great in the realm of thought, as ancient Greece did in a short time. Indeed, Roman civilization seems to have been in many respects a pale shadow of Hellenic civilization. In one thing, Romans are supposed to have given a great lead. This is law. Even now, lawyers in the West have to learn Roman law, as it is said to be the foundation of a great deal of law in Europe. The British Empire is often compared with the Roman Empire, usually by the English, to their own great satisfaction. All empires are more or less similar. They fatten on the exploitation of the many. But there is one other strong resemblance between the Romans and the English people. They are both singularly devoid of imagination. Smug and self-satisfied, and convinced that the world was made specially for their benefit, they go through life untroubled by doubt or difficulty. Dear friends and students, till now you were listening to the book The Glimpses of World History by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe to the channel. Let's meet in the next episode. Dear friends and students, you are listening to the book Glimpses of World History by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. Chapter number 35. Parthia and the Sassanids. April 26, 1932. We must leave the Roman Empire and Europe now for a visit to other parts of the world. We have to see what has been happening in Asia and to carry on the story of India and of China. Other countries now appear on the horizon of known history, and we shall have to say something about them also. Indeed, as we proceed, there will be so much to be said about so many places that I am likely to give up the job in despair. In one of my letters, I referred to a great defeat of the armies of the Roman Republic at the Battle of Carrhae in Parthia. I did not stop to explain about the Parthians and how they had managed to establish a state where Persia and Mesopotamia are now. You will remember that after Alexander, his general Seleucus and his descendants ruled an empire extending from India to Asia Minor in the west. For about 300 years they flourished, till they were driven away by another of the Central Asian tribes called the Parthians. It was these Parthians in Persia, or Parthia as it was called, that defeated the Romans during the last days of the Republic, and the empire that came later never succeeded in defeating them utterly. For 2.5 centuries they ruled Parthia, till an internal revolution drove them out. The Persians themselves rose against their alien rulers and put in their place one of their own race and religion. This was Ardashir I, and his dynasty is called the Sassanid dynasty. Ardashir was an ardent supporter of Zoroastrianism, which you will remember is the religion of the Parsis. And he was not very tolerant of other religions. Between the Sassanids and the Roman Empire, there was almost constant war. They even succeeded in capturing one of the Roman emperors. On several occasions, the Persian armies almost reached Constantinople. Once they conquered Egypt. The Sassanid Empire is chiefly notable for its religious zeal in favor of Zoroastrianism. When Islam came in the 7th century, it put an end both to the Sassanid Empire and the official religion. Many Zoroastrians preferred to leave their country because of this change and for fear of persecution, and they came to India, which welcomed them as she has welcomed all others who have come to her seeking refuge. The Parsis in India today are the descendants of these Zoroastrians. It is curious and rather wonderful to compare other countries with India in the matter of treatment of different religions. In most places, and especially in Europe, you will find in the past intolerance and persecution of all who do not profess the official faith. There was compulsion almost everywhere. You will read about the terrible Inquisition in Europe and of the burning of so-called witches. But in India, in olden times, there was almost full tolerance. The slight conflict between Hinduism and Buddhism was nothing compared to the violent conflicts of religious sects in the West. It is well to remember this, for, unhappily, we have had religious and communal troubles recently, and some people, ignorant of history, imagine that this has been India's fate right through the ages. This is wholly wrong. Such troubles are largely of recent growth. You will find that after Islam began, for many hundred years, Muslims lived in all parts of India in perfect peace with their neighbors. They were welcomed when they came as traders and encouraged to settle down. But I am anticipating. So India welcomed the Zoroastrians, just as a few hundred years before, she had also welcomed many Jews who fled from Rome in the 1st century after Christ on account of persecution. During the period of Sassanid rule in Persia, a little desert state flourished in Palmyra in Syria, and it had its brief day of glory. Palmyra was a trading market in the middle of the Syrian desert. Great ruins, to be seen even today, tell us of its mighty buildings. At one time, the ruler of the state was a woman named Zenobia. But she was defeated by the Romans, and they were unchivalrous enough to take her in chains to Rome. Syria was a pleasant land at the beginning of the Christian era. The New Testament tells us something about it. There were great towns and a dense population in spite of misgovernment and tyranny. There were large canals and an extensive trade. But continuous fighting and misrule reduced it in 600 years almost to a wilderness. The great towns were deserted and the old buildings were in ruins. If you fly by aeroplane from India to Europe, you will pass over these ruins of Palmyra and Baalbek. You will see where Babylon was, and many another place famous in history, and now no more. Dear friends and students, till now you were listening to the book The Glimpses of World History by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe to the channel. Let's meet in the next episode.